Okay, can we have an Eastern spirituality? Can we practice Buddhism and yoga and these awesome things from the East, from Asian? Those of us who are Western, I don't even mean that ethnically, I mean by culture. Those of us who are Western, by culture, can we practice Eastern things? Now, yes and no is the short answer. So as someone who's done a lot of Asian martial arts, giggly people at the hotel, as someone who's done a lot of Asian martial arts, who's done a lot of yoga, like 25 years, a lot of Buddhism. I've studied Buddhist meditation really in depth. Like I've lived in monasteries, I've done over 20 retreats. I've really, really studied it. Like I know my way through the Pali Canon inside out, for those who know Buddhism. And I got a lot of value from it. There's no doubt about it. Just Buddhism alone is a treasure. It's a human treasure for all of humanity. Of course, people do yoga because it gives them some benefit. Of course it does. You know, the average person goes to yoga class, a bit of mindfulness, you know, a bit of stretching. It's like, it's good for them. It's good for them. People feel better after doing Asian things. I feel like Asian arts particularly brought this idea of mindfulness to the West. And they've particularly brought this idea of practice. So yoga, as opposed to yoga, like, you know, stretching yoga, yoga means a discipline to develop oneself. Okay? So, you know, football could be a yoga if you were not playing it for entertainment or exercise, but you were playing it to develop oneself. Golf could be whatever, tennis could be whatever. And then, you know, there's always attempts in the West, the way of golf, the way of yoga, etc. So yoga, got a lot from that, absolutely. Martial arts, fantastic for you. You know, if I would make martial arts practice like it is in Japan, I'd make it absolutely mandatory in the school system in every country in the West. Like kind of like national service. I think we just see a huge change in the, you know, reduce the fragility and increase the discipline of every young person in the West. I just make it school every day, 9 a.m. martial arts. It's my dream. So I love it. You know, I was 3 years as a live-in martial arts student, so it was my life. So clearly I got a lot from it, right? Clearly I got a lot from it. So why is this video even a video? I mean, nearly 3 minutes in or whatever, and I'm just saying it's great. So I wanted to give it its due before I say, okay, but what's the problem? So I think Jung was the first to identify this. So Jung, one of the great psychologists of the West, studied a lot of Eastern things. He was known for his studies of Eastern spirituality. A student of Freud said, hey, Freud, it's not all about cocks, it's also about the spirit and soul. And he, though, eventually said, look, maybe Western people shouldn't do yoga and meditation. It doesn't resonate with them. It doesn't nourish their soul in the same way. Is this true? Well, I was at a retreat just recently, a monastic style retreat, and there was a monk leading it. He's actually a British guy, but he's trained in the Thai, what's called the Thai Forest Sangha tradition for a long time. Very, very good teacher, actually, Ajahn Chachito, and excellent teacher. You know, everyone was sort of with him, kind of pretending to be monks. You know, I sometimes think that you can't be half a monk. It's like being half a gangster or half pregnant. But, you know, that's what a general meditation retreat is. You're in silence, and you have 2 meals a day, and you don't have any sexual activity. And, you know, it's very renunciate, which is, you know, great for anti-decadence to do that sometimes. And there was a way in which it just seemed like a sort of cosplay to me. Like a, you know, like a Star Wars convention. So cosplay, costume plays where, you know, geeks will dress up in costumes. It's kind of fun, you know, childish and decadent, obviously, but also a lot of fun. I think it can be relatively benign, harmless decadence. There is such a thing. And, you know, they dress up as Star Wars characters or Star Trek characters or Warhammer characters, whatever. Good fun. Seems pretty benign. That's sometimes how it seems to me, like in yoga, like everyone's dressing up in the yoga clothes and they're saying namaste and, you know, or bowing. In Aikido, you know, I used to wear this sort of samurai outfit. So in Aikido, you wear a gi, just like pajamas, and a hakama, which is kind of like a black skirt, but it's like samurai riding trousers. And when you whip around in Aikido, it looks cool. And I remember someone pointing out to me that Westerners dressing up as medieval samurai was as ridiculous as Japanese people dressing up as cowboys. Yeah, or dressing up as, I don't know, knights in armor from Europe, yeah, as ridiculous. And there was something in it that was always exotic. You know, there's an exoticism in putting on your Aikido clothes or your karate clothes, exoticism in putting on your, whatever, your Buddhist apparel, doing things, you're bowing in a Buddhist way, it's very exotic, and that's what makes it sexy, right? The exotic is erotic is a phraseology that I think's got some truth in it. It makes it sexy, it makes it appealing. It's like, wow, that's cool. It's the Buddha, it's a tantric. Tibetan Buddhism is even more foreign, right? I've done some Tibetan Buddhist practice. I've been to some Tibetan Buddhist areas of India, and you'll see all these gods with many arms doing, and it's very appealing because it's exotic. But that's also what means that it's very distant. For me, the exotic is always outside of oneself. The Western part of Western culture is this openness, particularly to Asia. There's always been this Orientalism, this appeal of the exoticism and the making exotic, almost fetishizing Asia, actually. And I remember people would come to Aikido and they'd put their Aikido clothes on, and you could tell it was like getting them away from their life. So it's a kind of holiday from reality. That sense of going to yoga as a holiday, or going to live in Bali and, making it kind of your lifestyle, but it's still trying to escape the West. It's a sort of tropical, it's fake. The Bali crowd and the Koh Phangan crowd in Thailand, it's fake. It's just a sort of escapism from the West. It's not real. It's a pretend land. La la la, pretend hippie land. And the same thing with these practices, that exoticism creates distance, which means that integration is not likely to happen. Now, if you do enough of a practice, I really did a lot of Aikido. After a while, like every single day, you're wearing the gi, it starts to feel more natural. You lose that dressing up quality. It's just life. I remember sort of feeling like, okay, people coming every day to the dojo would take off their suit and tie, put on the Aikido clothes. They would immediately feel better, of course, because they were separate from their life. And that separation, what's called a container, and can be useful. But it was always a bit exotic, and they spent most of the class just sort of getting used to being in that exotic environment, and then they would leave. And my friend and I, Pietro, were living in the dojo, and you kind of integrate it a bit more, but it's still sort of silly. But one time I was in Russia, and I went to a yoga class, and I went to this yoga studio, and it was all these Russians sitting around in Indian-style clothes, playing sitars, eating curry, saying namaste. I just thought, this is so fucking silly. It just seemed so silly and so fake. It seemed so fake. And mostly young people, and I think sometimes young people need to travel to India or Japan or somewhere. They need to get away from the culture, and that's very healthy actually for teenagers to get away from it so they can compare, get the fish out of the water, see what's different. But being stuck in that stage forever, I think, is very limiting. It creates a kind of what's called spiritual bypassing, kind of a fake self, a way to not address oneself. The other thing I've noticed is, even after all this Buddhist practice, which I've done very sincerely for many years, Buddhism, yoga, Japanese martial arts, 3 different Thai, Japanese, Indian, 3 traditions that I think got a lot to offer culturally. It's still, I was in cathedral today. I went to the Cathedral of St. Michael in Bordeaux, where I am today, and it just cuts differently. The resonance, like, poof. I think there's an imprinting of the culture you're raised with. I don't think some people say this is more like genetic, it's more like tribal, ethnic. Maybe. I think, though, it's probably more like an imprinting that I just grew up in Catholicism, I grew up with the church. So there's a way in which, for example, I've had a number of sort of mystical experiences on meditation retreats when you're meditating 10 hours a day and fasting and doing very severe practice. You will quite likely have strong mystical experiences at some point. In your practice. And interestingly, those visions were always of saints, St. Michael, St. Gabriel, St. Christopher, I remember once. They're Jesus, they're the Virgin Mary, When I find myself in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me. It's the religion of one's ancestors and one's upbringing. Hard to know if it's more ancestors or upbringing. I think upbringing. Could be wrong. There is a resonance, though, with ancestral stuff. Like I'm in a sort of very pagan part of the UK, and there's a resonance to that I just never got in Japan. I just never got in India. Just never got in the Himalayas. I never got it. There's a resonance of the land that is different. And for me, that's sort of European paganism combined with, sort of 2 layers in Europe, right? There's the pagan layer and the Christian layer. For me, growing up, they were both there. Like, we'd have the harvest festival and the maypole festival, and the priest would be at the maypole ceremony, and we would bring I grew up in a rural area, and we'd bring the wheat into the church for the harvest festival. So they're all sort of, those 2 layers always there, in the UK at least. And there's a resonance to harvest festivals and maypoles and, kind of pagan stuff going on in the UK. There's a resonance when I go to these great cathedrals of Europe, Chartres, or, you know, just in Bordeaux today. It's just like, you know, like I cry. You know, I cry. It's hugely resonant for me. Seeing St. Michael, who's, you know, patron, the protector of Kiev, which has a strong resonance for me as well, from marriage and through work. And my own kind of persona, my own archetypal resonance is one of my patrons, as it were. And that's just not something I ever found in kind of Asian things. It always seemed a little bit foreign. I think that's true for 9 out of 10 people. I do think there's this sort of like what I call transcultural people. There's the odd Japanese person who should have been brought into Brazil. I think nature just sort of likes to mix it up. It likes to fuck with people. It's like, let's put a Japanese person into a Nigerian body. Fuck it. There's some sense that there's the odd person who really genuinely isn't sticking feathers up their arse and pretending to be a chicken. Great Zen phrase for you. It's what most of the sort of Westerners practicing Eastern arts looks like. It looks like people sticking feathers up their ass and pretending to be a chicken, pretending something they're not and spiritually bypassing. There are people, however, I think that it's genuine for, who are like just genuinely their soul, for whatever reason, just resonates with another culture. And that's great, right? Well, that's one of the great things of the modern world, is that we can go live abroad or we can study things from other places. It's really cool that they're available. I wouldn't want to be in the situation my mother was in the 60s, when she sort of spiritually, you know, as a young woman, started to kind of have an awakening, and then it was like, well, become a Catholic nun or that's your lot. You know, and then maybe 10 years later, the first yoga class is 50 miles drive from her, you know. She had a kind of much rougher situation pre-internet and pre the sort of all the teachers coming to the West that happened in the 60s and 70s. Her choices were far more limited. So I'm glad we have all these choices, but it's also confusing. And I think it enables us to sort of pretend to be something we're not with Eastern spirituality. It enables us to sort of do something that feels good and spiritual. Like yoga feels nice, doesn't it? It creates an endorphin rush, and the mindfulness makes it feel good without really addressing the deep aspects of our soul. Like I don't see Ashtanga yogis being somehow purified and transformed by it. They get nice deltoids and they're a bit more present. They look kind of healthy, but it's more of a well-being practice. Let's be honest. I don't see them becoming, you know, integrating it into their lives and communities in the same way. So should we do Asian practices? I think there's a lot to learn. I think particularly the idea of practice, I think the idea of mindfulness, I think, you know, there's a lot of great stuff that comes from Asia, and would be, you know, I'm less familiar with some of the kind of African stuff. I've got some teachers from sort of Haiti traditions, other traditions, you know, I just want to acknowledge that they exist, but I'm not well versed in them. Let's say other cultures then, not just Asia. Asia just happens to be the one that I have familiarity with. Should we take stuff on from other cultures? I think it's useful to try them. It's useful to take on some aspects. The idea of praxis, I think, particularly from Asia, is amazing. We should respect them. Will they really resonate with us? Maybe. I would say be open to re-embracing some of the Western traditions, whether it's Christian or pagan. Even if it's just like, you know, for years, even before I had this intellectual like I have now, now I sort of understand it, but for years I just liked going to churches. Like, you know, intellectually I was very anti-Christian. I was like, oh, I'm not into that, that's patriarchal. But actually I just used to love the feel, and every time I was in a big city I'd go to the biggest church and love it. I'd say be open to that spirituality, whether it's from the land, whether it's, you know, the green fields of England for me, or whether it's the cathedrals of Europe. Be open to that. Yeah, before you embrace, before you sort of say, hey, well, I'm going to, you know, be, another one is Native American. I haven't talked about that. That's another one. In the States, that's huge. People think, oh, it's more spiritual to be Native. This idea that other cultures are more spiritual, it's actually a deeply racist idea. It's a deeply self-hating and snobby and racist idea. And you'll see that, you know, something Native American is somehow, you know, more spiritual. Yeah, of course, if you are a Native American, I'm sure there's a resonance that I can't understand. Yeah, and there's things to be learned there. There's things that we can reconnect with, we can admire. But honestly, I think one needs to, at least on some level, re-own the spirituality of one's culture. And, you know, actually, I spent this meditation retreat was 7 days, and I spent 5 days there, and it was great, and I was enjoying it. Good teachers, great place. But I actually left early. I left early because I just was, you know what, I'd rather be actually sitting in a cafe in Paris, sitting in a cafe in Bordeaux as the sun goes down with a beautiful French woman enjoying Bordeaux. I'd rather be in the cathedral in Bordeaux. I'd rather be just absorbing the kind of spirituality of the West that's so rich and obvious here in Bordeaux. You know, Bordeaux's a beautiful French town. Yeah, for me that was as satisfying as pretending to be an Asian monk doing the cosplay, Buddhist cosplay. Again, still a treasure house Buddhism, so kind of two sides. That's my take on it. I hope that was something useful.